The recording has begun. My name is Will Hull, and this is it is the Wisconsin wild card for Unit 2 for Division C, and this is the hearing for the We the People National Finals. In a moment, I'll have the judges introduce themselves, followed by the students, and then we'll begin our hearing. Students will deliver a 4-minute prepared statement, followed by 8 minutes of judge follow-up questions. My microphone will be muted. However, I will be showing a 1-minute sign as well as a time sign to signal those periods of the hearing. For those of you who are on Zoom and can see in your very top right-hand corner, there is a view option, a little icon for view. If you click on that, it'll let you pick the gallery view so that you can see everybody on the screen at the same time. At the conclusion of the hearing, the judges will provide some brief feedback and then we will conclude. At this time, I'll go ahead and pass the mic over to the judging panel where they can introduce themselves.
Thank you very much. So while there are no points for style, I appreciate your look today. And if you can see the judges, we also decided to dress similarly with our blue blazers and blue shirts. So we're all in sync here. That's great. Good to see you. So again, we're going to be talking about Unit 2, Question 2, just for reference. And we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves to you. And if you would do the same. My name is Chuck Dunlap. I'm president and CEO of the Indiana Bar Foundation in Indianapolis, Indiana. And Tim, we'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself next.
Great. Good afternoon or good evening and welcome and congratulations for being here. My name is Tim Igo. I am a writer, magazine editor, and lawyer, and I work at the State Bar of Arizona in Phoenix.
My name is Nick Drummond. I'm an assistant professor of political science at Black Hills State University in South Dakota.
If you go ahead and introduce yourself to us.
Hi, judges. We are the Unit 2 representatives from Wauwatosa East High School representing Wisconsin Wild, and we are coached by Mr. Taylor McDaniel. And my name is Lauren Wunderlich, and I'm alongside Annie Schiller, Nathan Foley, Anya Ramft, and Alex Joseph.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I guess I will go ahead and read the question then, and we will get started by hearing from you. One founder claimed that representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders, and what alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century? You may begin.
James Madison envisioned a democracy in which people were represented by those whose knowledge would best lead the country. But this requires trust. In America today, can we really have trust in our representatives?
During the convention, many alternative forms of representation stemming from ancient confederacies were considered. Framers specifically took inspiration from Lycia and the Haudenosaunee. During the heated debate over representation, New Jersey and Virginia plans, Madison used the example of Lycia to defend his proposal of proportional representation in the House and Senate, one of the most controversial provisions during the convention. The Articles of Confederation's unicameral legislature with the equal representation proved to be ineffective, but tyranny of the majority was still a monumental concern.
A fear of direct democracy constructed the foundation for the proposition and establishment of the Electoral College. However, Federalist Gouverneur Morris supported a direct election of the president, and we hold today that the Electoral College should be reconstructed to support his view. The president-elect has lost the popular vote 5 times, twice since the year 2000. This clearly demonstrates that the Electoral College does not do the proper job of, quote, refining and enlarging the people's views.
James Madison wrote in Federalist 10, quote, "Extend the sphere, and you take in a greater variety of parties and interests. You make it less probable that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens," end quote. These words prove true today, as a 2019 CNN poll finds that only 1 in 10 citizens believe our current 2-party system works well.
Our solution to this is to implement multi-member proportional representation, or MMP, where seats are constantly apportioned to votes and voters have a wider range of choices. MMP allows for voters to separate the party from the representative, permitting for less partisan decisions. Germany's federal legislature, the Bundestag, similarly apportions 709 seats to its population of 80 million in 16 states. The system works to eliminate gerrymandering, prevent tyranny of the minority, and embrace political diversity, all things we believe the framers would support today.
We concur with Madison's stance that representatives should refine and enlarge the view of the public and use wisdom to best discern the true interests of the country. In his quote from Fed 10, Madison reflects the ideas of a trustee model of representation, supported by fellow Federalists and originally explained by Irish philosopher Edmund Burke.
The trustee model is where delegates act in the interest of what they believe to be best for their country while taking into account the views of their constituents. The trustee model encourages classical Republican ideals and is the most ideal system of representation for the United States because it encourages cooperation and unity. On the contrary, the delegate theory of representation idealized the role of a representative being a direct voice for the people. However, Madison argues that a delegate theory would lead to tyranny of the majority, and we believe that it negates the power of a representative democracy.
The trustee model, though, is not without nuance. Under this model, representatives' actions can imply distrust in the knowledge and views of the people. Wyoming Representative Liz Cheney voted in her own conscience regarding the impeachment of former President Donald Trump, but was swiftly rebuked by her own party when they censured her. In response, she stated, quote, "My vote to impeach was compelled by the oath I swore to the Constitution. Wyoming citizens know that this oath does not bend or yield for politics or partisanship," end quote. While Cheney's decision demonstrated a shortfall in this model, ultimately the trustee model encourages bipartisanship.
Liz Cheney put the interest of her country first, upholding the views of many framers. John Adams stated, quote, "Government is instituted for the common good, for the protection, safety, posterity, and happiness of the people," end quote. If we can trust that our representatives are working for the common good of the people, we can continue to trust in the ideals that built the framework of the Constitution. This concludes our statement, and we are now ready for your questions.
Thank you. Go ahead and start off with the first question. You mentioned the Representative Cheney and the model there. How do you think political parties play in this idea of either delegate or trustee model? Is that a separate sort of force that political participants are beholden to? Is it a positive influence or is it a negative influence?
Political parties definitely play a huge role in the creation of these models. I think they play the biggest role, and I think these models actually depend on your relationship to a political party. This is why we see such great partisanship in places like the Senate. This partisanship drives the filibuster. It also drives support for a candidate usually, and that's why our new model, our new mode of representation, the MMP, would work to dissolve that.
We also see that when constituents are voting, they often vote in the intention of their representatives adhering to the delegate model. And we can see this with very partisan issues such as abortion. Constituents will vote for a representative that they want to consistently adhere to this ideal. And that's why most people in the House who are more connected to their constituents use more of the delegate theory rather than the trustee.
Thank you.
Could I go back to one thing you said when you were talking about MMP, which I appreciate. Do you all agree that the founders would have supported the diversity that MMP would bring?
Considering one of the strongest compromises, and that it has lasted so long, was the Connecticut Compromise between the New Jersey and Virginia plans, as established in Article 1, Sections 1 through 3, has held up through today. The founders wanted to have diversity in the legislature. And although MMP forms diversity in the form of political parties, which can form coalitions to represent a wider spectrum of interests, the founders would have likely supported this variety in ideas.
Also, it wasn't incredibly partisan at that time. Even between the factions of anti-federalists and federalists, there were ideas that were spread within. For example, for the trustee theory, an anti-federalist 53 made by Amicus, that was the pen name, we don't know the actual person, they actually supported the trustee model, which goes against a couple of anti-federalist viewpoints that were very much for state powers and powers to the people instead, and things like that, where if they were very bipartisan at that time, I don't think they would have enjoyed that diversity within there. And with Fed 10, he was encouraging factions debating with each other and going against each other for the sake of power.
Thank you.
You mentioned the anti-federalists a few times. What do you think about their recommendation that we have term limits and rotating representatives. What was that idea all about? Do you agree or disagree?
I agree that there definitely needs to be term limits, not only in the legislature, but in the executive. In a Federalist 70 and along with in the Hamilton plan, Hamilton argues for a very energetic executive, an executive that wouldn't really have term limits. But we can see that too strong of an executive would create massive problems, especially in Cato 4. George Clinton states, quote, "If a president is possessed of ambition, he has the power and time to ruin the country." And I think that this clearly demonstrates that term limits are needed to keep the government in check and to keep checks and balances in order.
As well as in Federalist 70, it explains that an energetic executive is completely and utterly useless unless backed up by a Republican form of government, which anti-federalists at the time, they were completely against and feared for that. But has brought to today, I stated in Article 4, Section 4, a Republican government has been ensured, and it stands to today.
This fear also wasn't just in the executive and the legislative. Brutus 14 through 15 constantly discussed that idea of having a life term in Article 3, Section 1. That was a big fear because he felt that if they are the ones that are interpreting those parts of the Constitution, that shouldn't be a life term for them.
So one thing you mentioned in your remarks was this a couple times, this concept of tyranny of the majority. Could you talk a little bit about just generally, is our system of government designed to deal with that? Or are there dangers within the representative branch or other branches of government that would lend themselves to that danger in particular?
I first kind of want to talk about Federalist 10 and how James Madison tries to make the people almost afraid of themselves by saying that tyranny of the majority is something that the government is targeting, when in reality, we should be targeting tyranny of the minority. We see that with the filibuster in the Senate. We see it with the Electoral College. In no other place in our government can someone lose the majority of votes, but somehow still win the position. So I think the tyranny of the minority is something that we'll be focusing on far more.
Tyranny of the minority is also clearly shown in the Electoral College, as stated in Article 2, Section 1. So under the Electoral College, smaller states have honestly gained even more power while the government is split 50-50. While the United States is split 50-50, Democrats and Republicans, in the Senate, Republican representatives represent 41 million more people than Democratic representatives. And I think it is clearly an issue that needs to be addressed, and we believe that the Electoral College should be abolished.
So should the majority always be right? Is there a role for any minority perspective or representation or counterbalance to the majority, the will of the majority, or should there be?
No, the majority shouldn't always be right. And that is why we are really advocating for MMP, where if you do win 5% more of the vote, you should be getting seats in government. However, there are some flaws to this if we're going to talk about the minority. In Germany specifically, the AfD is an extremist right-wing party, and they have the third most amount of seats in the Bundestag. They have 94 seats out of 709. So that is something, the minority, while it should be representative, it can also be feared, and I think that's valid.
Also, under the political system that we have today, which is called Politico, which is a mix of trustee and delegate when it comes to actual facilitation of creating laws and different things like that, it is very focused on public opinion. And so representatives will focus more on what the people are saying rather than what their ideas might need to go through, and just to be reelected once again.
Curious whether you believe that Madison's notion that minority factions are maybe useful but not dangerous, and majority factions are dangerous, whether that's an antiquated view given social media, where minority views like fascism in Germany or in America can become so prominent that it almost doesn't matter that they're a minority view. They are an existential threat.
Arthur Lee in Anti-Federalist 64 establishes that a fear of an aristocracy. If the Senate works in conjunction with the executive branch, he writes that lawmaking and law enforcing powers would be vested in the same branch. in fear of the minority in government and in factions, as we see today with conspiracy groups. May I continue?
Yeah, please finish your thought.
Conspiracy related groups such as QAnon have posed threats and have even caused problems such as the Capitol riots of January 6th.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Great job. We thought we'd give you a little bit of feedback now. I'll start off from my perspective. First of all, your opening statement was really very, very deep. A lot of robust concepts, and certainly the conversation we had afterwards continued in that vein. I really appreciated that. Interesting discussion, I thought, with the idea of tyranny of the minority and the sort of supermajority, or if you look at the other side of the equation, the minority able to, depends on your perspective, of course, but play a oversized role. But the idea of, it's interesting too, how you respect the minority role. It wasn't so long ago that a majority of people in the country had a particular view against same-sex marriage, and that has evolved and changed over time. So what is a minority view could potentially evolve and change over time to a majority view, and how does that particular dynamic play out within our elected branches? And one person's sort of obstacle is another person's preservation of a perspective or a constitutional right potentially. So it's difficult. This whole thing is difficult, and that's why we're having such great discussions, is because it's not easy. But I think the thing that came through most to me is your depth of knowledge in this area is extremely deep. We could have talked for a lot longer, and I wish we could, but I know you have places to go and next rounds, et cetera. But it was a really enjoyable conversation, and I really enjoyed having it with you. So thank you.
So I would agree. I thought it was a fascinating dialogue, and it really truly was a dialogue. So I thank you for that. Well written and well presented, and that indicates to me that you have a deep level of knowledge and really solid thinking about these issues. I appreciate your strong position on MMP. I think it was well evidenced and well supported. I appreciate your timely references, your willingness to discuss modern day, because that's really what the Constitution's about. It's not really about what happened in 1776. It's about how it plays out today. So your willingness to talk about abortion, Lynn Cheney's position on impeachment, those are strong pieces of evidence. And your strong position about the Electoral College should be abolished. I also appreciate your narrative style and your willingness. I think Anya said in response to the Chief Judge, I first want to talk about Federalist 10. I think that was a very polite way to turn the conversation to what you'd like to discuss, and yet you still answered his question, but it was a polite way to control the narrative, and that's going to be important in any kind of legislative presentation you'd ever do, is to always keep in mind your thesis that you want to maintain in a polite way. And finally, I appreciate your opening that it's about trust of our representatives. It truly is. Ultimately, it's also about trust of fellow citizens, isn't it? And I don't know, I've met many of our fellow citizens, and I'm still on the bubble about whether I trust any of them. Anyway, this was very, very well done. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I concur. Very, very well done. What I noticed is that you had an answer for everything and there was no hesitation, which suggests to me that you were very well prepared for this competition. And I commend your teacher for that. I commend you for that. In particular, your command of the founding documents, Constitution, Federalist Paper, Anti-Federalist Papers, all of you seem to have a strong command of that, and we're ready to fire that off. It really spiced up and strengthened your answers, and job well done.
All right, with that, this will wrap up Wisconsin Wildcard Unit 2 for Division C. At this time, I invite the judges and the students to thank each other.
Thank you.
Thank you.